Hello, fellow BI members. I've been asked to give you a taste of my upcoming talk that I'll be giving during Shabbat services on March 15th. I was honored and privileged to be asked to join the Prime Minister Stephen Harper's mission to Israel and state visit, which started on January 19th. I can sum up the trip by saying that rarely have I been so proud of being a Canadian. I think that Mr. Harper showed a level of statesmanship through his moral clarity that few Canadian leaders have achieved. In Mr. Harper's speech delivered to the Israeli Knesset, Mr. Harper showed principle, balance, and fortitude that we could only wish that all of our politicians shared. He spoke as a leader who cherishes the Canadian values of democracy, human rights, freedom, and peace. The cartoonist in the Montreal Gazette, you know the one, who showed Mr. Harper with face paint of an Israeli flag and said it was to show how Mr. Harper was such a rabid fan of Israel, he had it all wrong. Mr. Harper's not a rabid fan. He is the even-handed referee. Mr. Harper went to the Palestinian territories and handed them $65 million because it's the right thing to do to assist poor people. Mr. Harper went to Jordan and gave them $150 million to help them deal with their Syrian refugee problem because it's the right thing to do to alleviate suffering. No, the Montreal Gazette had it completely wrong. Mr. Harper was balanced and fair. By his words, Mr. Harper showed that he doesn't accept anyone's propaganda. That includes the propaganda of Israel's constant critics and the Israeli right wing. Because he again made it clear that Canada supports a Palestinian state within secure borders and a democratic state. Quote, "We share with Israel a sincere hope that the Palestinian people and their leaders will choose a viable, democratic Palestinian state committed to living peacefully alongside the Jewish state of Israel." Unquote. In fact, the sports analogy of the Montreal Gazette is appropriate because that is something most Canadians understand. A rabid hockey fan will think that his team can do no wrong. Their goals are good goals and the goals of the other team are lucky goals. When a penalty is called against their team, they think it's a bad call. But when penalties are called against the other team, it was well-deserved, and in fact, many more penalties should have been called against the other team. Well, Mr. Harper, the referee, asked, quote, "What can we call criticism that selectively condemns only the Jewish state and effectively denies its right to defend itself while systematically ignoring or excusing the violence and oppression all around it?" He also said, quote, "We understand that Israelis live with this impossible calculus. If you act to defend yourselves, you will suffer widespread condemnation over and over again. But should you fail to act, you alone will suffer the consequence of your inaction. And that consequence will be final, your destruction." Unquote. Mr. Harper, the referee, said that all sides need a level playing field, that the rules cannot be fixed in favor of one side or the other. It's not acceptable, Mr. Harper noted, that, quote, "Israel is routinely targeted at the United Nations, and Israel remains the only country to be the subject of a permanent agenda item at the regular sessions of its Human Rights Council," unquote. In my view, if something like sports is recognized to have to be fair, isn't it that much more important when the survival of a people's national homeland is at stake? Shouldn't something as important as the Jewish national homeland and the Palestinian national homeland have to be discussed and considered without undue prejudice and with substantial knowledge of the context and the history? To Mr. Harper, the answer is a resounding yes. It is important to be unbiased, even-handed, and knowledgeable. And that is what makes in sports a very good referee, or in politics, a great statesman. To carry this sports analogy just a bit further, on March 15th, The BI has a terrific doubleheader. At the morning Shabbat service, I will talk more about my impressions of the Harper state visit to Israel and my experience during that state visit. In the evening, there is the annual BI Purim Spiel for adults, created by the amazingly talented Jonathan Berkowitz. And it's entitled Dvar Trek, The Wrath of Haman. It promises to be the best Purim Spiel ever. See you there.